Okay, we're recording. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here with us today. I'm Liz Trediak, the Northborough Senior Center Director, who's been here just almost a year now. It's really nice to see all your faces on Zoom. Today with us, we have Karen or Ren Antonovich, who is back with us by popular demand. She was here with us earlier in the fall for a fashion presentation called Cocktail Culture, Fashion of the Mad Men Era, and it was hugely popular here. And I got so many emails, Facebook messages, phone calls, just saying how much everyone enjoyed that presentation. So we had to have you back. So today we have you here for Fashion and the First Lady. So Ren, I'm so happy you're here with us, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Liz. Hi, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I probably saw some of you in the last Zoom. It's so hard because the screen it's so small, the pictures of everybody. But if you went to the Cocktail Culture event, thank you for being there. And thank you for being here today. Welcome to everyone. And I'm going to do just what I did last time. I'm going to share the screen. And I'm going to go here, get my PowerPoint and share it as I always do. And this is what will happen. I will, as before, go through all of my slides and video clips on Fashion and the First Lady. And then at the end, I'll stop the screen share and I'll show you the garments and accessories that I pulled out that I thought you'd specifically enjoy for this topic. So that's what we'll do. And let me get my slideshow ready. And then we'll open it up after that for any comments or questions. So I'm so happy you're here. I told Liz it really helps me, as well as maybe helping all of you, to have something interesting to talk about, to listen to, and just to be with people, even if it's virtually. So I'm very grateful for it. Okay, so Fashion and the First Lady, I told Liz, has been a very popular topic, most likely because of the election year that we just had with all its drama and craziness. But first ladies are always interesting, no matter what. We usually focus on them for fashion more so than we would the president. Of course, we're looking at the women's fashions. And, you know, we're going back to the beginning here. I'm going to start from the beginning of pretty much at the first president, but we're not going to cover every first lady because you would be really tired by the end of it. I know you would be. It's just too many people. So I focused on a few of the more fashionable ladies, and then some who aren't so fashionable but had other things to contribute. So let's go ahead and get started on that. Okay, look at this fast. I'm going to go back. It's going to change. There it goes. Okay. All right. What is that? Well, this is the slide I'm going to show you is what it looked like before the French Revolution in terms of fashion. People were looking to the courts, especially in France, for their fashion inspiration. And of course, with the French Revolution, the monarchy was dissolved and the total revolution in fashion happened as well. So take a look at the court dress and then it's going to switch. Very, very fancy. And then it became a lot more almost utilitarian looking compared to what it had been. And that's because people who wanted to abolish the monarchy didn't want to dress like that anymore. They wanted people to be more equal, you know, have that more of a democracy and have people be able to follow fashion no matter what their state or what their stage status, etc. So if you look at the bottom of the screen, that middle picture, that by 1800, roughly, right at the turn of the century, this is what the fashion started to look like. And I'm telling you this because it was a really drastic switch. Notice the empire waist, the really, really high waistline. That was to do with the empire period that we were looking at. Think about Napoleon being in, but it was also a statuesque look. And women were wearing a lot of muslin dresses, very kind of lightweight and very slim compared to those big skirts we'd seen in the previous century. And this was to sort of imitate the Greek and Roman statues from the classical period. So this was named the neoclassical period. They wanted to look back at the values of the Democratic Republic of that time. So they imitated that in their decor in the homes. They imitated that in dress as well. So we'll look at that a little more. And the first lady who we will talk about, we'll start right off with Abigail Adams. She wasn't the first one, but she was the first one in the White House, first tenants, she and John Adams, 1796 to 1800. So she's right around that same period. The house wasn't full of furniture like we know it today. In fact, Abigail used the East Room to dry her laundry. So it wasn't like it was this fancy place like we know it today. She resented obligations of being a first lady, but she did entertain often and formally. So she did her job, but she just wasn't really thrilled. She also refused to change her appearance for the sake of fashion. So if you look at her on the left as a young woman, and then you the right as an older woman, you can see she still has that empire waist. So, you know, a lot of times in youth, you'll see, not so much maybe now, but years ago, the older women would not be in the latest fashions. They would be in fashions they were more comfortable with when they were younger. So that's pretty common. So we see that with her specifically. And speaking of this period, and we'll talk more about this in a second, but this is an extreme example of what I was telling you about with that great Greek and Roman statue imitation. Look at the dress on the woman. She's got, it looks sheer, doesn't it? And it usually was quite lightweight. So you can oftentimes see the ankles. And if you can look closely to that picture, look at her ankles. You can see some design on the stockings. That's called clocking like the timepiece. And what it was embroidery that was added to hose, and on men too. Whenever there was a chance you might see the ankle or the shoe, they wanted to, of course, have that embellished as well. So you're seeing that clocking right there. She's also wearing a cashmere shawl from India, which was very popular at this period and would continue to be so for some years ahead. The hat she's wearing is called the Red Cap of Liberty. And a lot of times, you know, people were sympathetic to the revolution. Some were sympathetic to the monarchy and what happened to the monarchy, especially if they had relatives or friends who had been involved in the court. So you had kind of had both things going on. The gentleman is in an extreme style as well. And of course, the females were called merveilleuses, the marvelous ones, and men were incroyable or incredible ones, because they're just so extreme in their fashion. Notice how the hair is kind of disheveled on both the lady and the gentleman. And that's partly because when the king and queen went to the guillotine, their hair would be just roughly, shorn off. They just would get rid of as much hair as they could. So it was easier to cut the head off. And so they're kind of imitating that style. And again, sometimes out of sympathy, some women would wear a red ribbon around their neck to show, the spot where the head would have been cut off. So they did go to extremes. And notice the man is wearing, even though they look like knee breeches that we saw at court, these are actually a version of the new types of pants that they were going to wear into this next century. And they're trousers, but they were called pantaloons at the time. And you can see they have ties on the side. Usually boots would be worn over those too. He has shoes in this case. The other thing that's extreme is the collars of the men's shirts are really high, touching the chin. I mean, this is my favorite period for men. I just adore this. So you'll see more and more of that in a minute. Of course, any extreme in fashion is going to be made fun of by the cartoonists. So this is a cartoon, of course, showing a great deal of the women's bodies because there's a stiff wind blowing. So you can see the outline of, some specific kind of private parts there. And so that's really showing, this is what it's come to. And you can see the ankle showing, and you can even see the clocking, as I mentioned, on the hosiery. The necklines became very low too. During the day, women were expected to put something more modest, a modesty piece or some sort of like a scarf-like garment or filler in the top. But in the evening, they could show more skin. And so that's when, the neckline became very, very low and the breast was sort of pushed up. You can see almost everything at that point. but that was considered okay for evening dress. If you look at the second from the left, you can see there's a lot of kind of gathering in the back of the dress. It's because it was just a big round piece of fabric. And in order to fit it to that high bodice or that high, empire line waist, they had to do all that gathering. And that's called a round gown. That's what that's called. So you can see too, the sleeves were often like puffy, sometimes just very straight. So you had options at that time. What did they wear over the dresses? Because boy, it had to be pretty cold. And, they're in these light dresses. And even though they did have undergarments on, they weren't always very warm either. So the lady on the left has what's called a pelisse, Pelisse. And that's her outer coat. And it goes over that muslin gown. And you can see it has the same silhouette, the same empire line. And it's very slim because it's not a full skirt underneath. So it's okay. Look at the size of the muff that she's carrying, the hand muff. The muffs during this period were huge, as you can see. It's almost half as tall as she is. Notice the statue that she's leaning on. It was very common for art of that day, women's portraits to be painted near these classical statues to emphasize this neoclassical period. The woman in the center is wearing a very short jacket called a spencer. And it looks like the crop jackets that were popular several years ago, but it's just a jacket that exactly matches the empire waist of the gown underneath it. But it does give a little bit extra warmth. And you can wear it inside or outside. The last lady on the right is also wearing a spencer, and most times it was a contrasting color to the dress underneath, as you can see in these two cases. But in addition to the spencer, she has her shawl as well. So she has that hanging over her shoulder and her arm for additional warmth. Okay, the next lady we're going to talk about is Dolly Payne Todd Madison. The first sort of fashion icon from America, the first lady that was sort of looked upon with admiration for her style. She loved, unlike Abigail, she loved entertaining. She loved her obligations. She held these popular drawing rooms, they were called. And I think they were once a month. I don't think they were once a week, but it was either once a month or once a week. And anyone who dressed properly could go. So she became a very popular and well-loved first lady. She loved French style gowns, and the more daring, the better. And you can see even in her later years, she's continuing to wear that same style, even with the empire waist. She followed Jefferson, who, excuse me, who never decorated the White House. So it wasn't, again, with her, there was no big decoration like you'd see now. And 1814, the British burned the White House down, and it wasn't rebuilt until 17. By 1817, it was rebuilt again. But Dolly was sort of a hero or heroine because when the house was being torched, she grabbed George Washington's portrait out of the frame and hid it under her dress before escaping to Virginia. So she was pretty brave woman, and people really admired her for that. And you can see her inauguration dress there is quite lovely, right in the middle. And as I said, she was quite beloved as a first lady and stylish too. She loved her, like I said, that low cut neckline. She never really stopped wearing that. Okay, well, after her reign as First Lady, we go forward a few years, and now we're looking at some English influence because Queen Victoria came to the throne. And as we know, she's going to have quite a long reign on the throne. She was only 18 when she had her coronation, and she was quite stylish. But the problem was she lost Albert, she loved her husband, lost him at a fairly young age and never came out of mourning. So she wore black every day for the rest of her life. And she kind of lost that, way to inspire women in terms of fashion. But mourning dress became very, very specific, particular, lots of rules around it. And that's a topic for another day, because you could talk about that for at least an hour or two. She really was an influence, though, in the beginning. There's a series, Victoria, that was out, but there was also a movie this came out a number of years ago, called The Young Victoria. And it was with Emily Blunt as Victoria, and it's her younger years. So you really see her looking stylish in that movie. So that's a fun one if you haven't seen it yet. Okay, transitioning before we get to Victoria, I'm just going from where we were into this new period. We had just seen those empire waist gowns, but now by 1820, when we start moving into this next decade, you see the waist is getting lower. So it's going towards the natural waist. Not only that, you're starting to see decoration at the bottom of the skirt. And the skirt's a little wider, isn't it? So not only is the waist more at the natural spot, but you're also seeing a little more fullness. And I don't know if you notice it, but the two ladies on the left, look at the shoulder line. You're starting to see a widening of that shoulder that we hadn't really seen in the past decades. By the late 1820s, that shoulder line became even more extreme. And the dress is even a little bit above the ankle, a little bit above the floor. So, and a fuller skirt still. But what really showed up by the time the late 20s and 1830s came along was the sleeves. The sleeves became crazy big, and you'll see that in a second. Look at the hairdo of the ladies on the right. That's called a la chinoise. And it was popular at the time. If you watch The Young Victoria, the movie I just mentioned, her mother, the woman who plays her mother, has that hairdo in a couple of scenes. So it's interesting to see that. So as I mentioned, you start to see the skirts lifting from the ground. You start to see the feet and the ankles, which is pretty shocking when you think about it for that time period. And this was called really the Romantic period. I've danced, I was in ballet for a long, long time. And the Romantic period of the ballerinas with those really frothy white gowns. And when you look at the ladies' shoes, it almost looks like they have dance slippers on. So yeah, this is all sort of related. And it's almost like they're wearing those long tutus. But look at those sleeves. Those are huge. They were called gigot, G-I-G-O-T, gigot sleeves. But they were dubbed imbecile sleeves because they were a status symbol. A woman who needed to do anything in terms of physical work could not walk around with those sleeves. It just wouldn't be practical. So, you know, they were dubbed that, and it was a way to show that a woman had all leisure time. She was always at her leisure, and she could wear that without too much discomfort. The outer garments, again, we still have the pelisse, which you see on these ladies, and it's the same kind of a long coat, but now it's following the silhouette of this decade or this period. And you see the wide shoulder again. And you see the bonnets are getting a little bit rounder around the face. They had been a little higher in the last couple of decades. And then gradually, by the time we get to the 1840s, we're really seeing a more somber look. We don't see that light, frivolous, romantic look now. We're looking at a heavier look and silhouette. Skirt's getting fuller still, but the hemline dropped back down. And the waistline is definitely more at the natural waist now. If you look at the third lady from the left, it's almost as if somebody took a pin and popped the sleeve like a balloon and made all of the fullness go down at the lower part of the arm, and it's very tight to the upper part of the arm. That's a really good way to see you're coming out of the 30s and into the 40s. And again, as I said, the colors are just a little bit more serious looking than they had been. That's a riding habit, the second lady from the left. And in this period, 41 to 45, we will look at Julia Gardner Tyler, who married President John Tyler as a sitting president. And she was also young too. She was the youngest first lady. She was only 21 when she came in. But she was kind of shocking people for a while, because before this marriage to President Tyler, she was in an advertisement, which you see in the center. And it was for a New York City department store. And she was a celebrity overnight. They billed her the Rose of Long Island. But it wasn't something to be proud of by people, you know, with high status. So, and she was with a gentleman she didn't know. So that was even more shocking. So that's the advertisement they were talking about. But she was only in the White House for 9 months, because again, he was already the president when she married him. She had a very vibrant social world though. And she was widely liked, and she didn't have any one fashion trend, but she was visible. She was very visible as a first lady. And if you look at the left picture of her as a really young woman, that you see how she's got some gathering at the waist, and it almost goes up like a fan, up and out. That is typical 1840s. That's very, very common for that particular time period. So she fits right into that. And now we're going to see another change. We're going into the 1850s, and the skirt's going to get, believe it or not, even wider and more circular, rounder. And the waist is even more cinched. You can see that on the ladies on the left. And of course, day wear is still going to be quite covered up, but in the evening, you can really see the shoulders bared again. More skin can be shown in evening wear. And if you look on the right and you look at the bottom of that dress that's on the mannequin, on the dress form, if you look at the bottom of the skirt, you can see a line. That is where the cage crinoline ends. And the cage crinoline was a wonderful development that came along in the 1850s. Prior to that, to get full skirts like this, ladies had to drag around a number of petticoats, often very heavy ones. So it was uncomfortable for them. So by the time this cage crinoline, which you know what that looks like, it's just like a big hoop skirt, and it was very light. And it could really fill out the skirt. So a woman only really had to wear one petticoat. She didn't have to wear all those layers anymore. So I wanted you to, and a lot of times you'll see, if you look at dresses from this period, you'll see that outline on the bottom. And take a look at the amazing detail in the waistline of this dress. It's gorgeous. Look at that waist. Of course, that's corseting. Another thing that was popular in the 1850s is cartridge pleating. If you can see, if you look at the waist, there was so much fabric there that they had to gather to that small waist that I don't sew, I'm terrible at it, but cartridge pleating, if you do sew, you'll know what it is. You just pleat all the way around and then you run the needle through those pleats. So it looks like almost like cartridges that they have, you know, when you put your bullets in, whatever. But that's what that is, cartridge pleating, and really a lot of work for a dressmaker for sure. The lady that we'll talk about in this period is Harriet Lane Johnston. And, you know, I had read she was first to be called First Lady, but then I read that it was really Mary Todd Lincoln. So you're going to hear that in one of the clips. So I'm not even sure about that. I'm going to have to look into that a little bit more. But anyway, she was right before Mary Todd. So it's not a big deal either way. 57 to 61. And she didn't marry the president. It was her uncle, James Buchanan. So he was a confirmed bachelor. And so he needed someone to help him run the White House. And it was his niece, Harriet. And she was really lucky because he had gone to Europe because he was a diplomat in Britain. So she was able to spend some time at Queen Victoria's court, and she loved fashion and French fashion. So she was pretty sophisticated. So a perfect one probably to help him run that White House. She had the privilege of entertaining the Prince of Wales, who became King Edward VII. And Buchanan became president in 1857. Think about that. Right before the Civil War. So it was a lot of unrest. So he came in at a very, very difficult time, the secession of the Union and all of that. So it must have been a tough job for both of them, for sure. You can see her dress on the right, inauguration gown. Again, let's look at the extremes of fashion and make fun of it. So here, she's wearing a type of hoop skirt that looks more like a petticoat, but it's so wide that her maid can't get to her to tie the bodice, so she has to lie down on her stomach. So of course, that wasn't really what happened, but they have to make fun of it. Another one I love too, another cartoon, I'll have to find this one and put it in, but it's a group of ladies and gentlemen, and they're at, you know, a soiree or a specific evening of entertainment. And the men are trying to serve the ladies their beverages and snacks, but they can't get to them because the dress is so wide. So they have these long sticks that have the goodies on the end of them to get to the ladies. It's a great picture. But anyway, yeah, they always try to make fun of anything that's this extreme. Oh, going too fast there. Okay, that's just showing you day into evening wear. So there's your day wear. This is still 1850s, and we're going into the late 50s now. And we're looking at the day dresses, same thing, very covered up. And you even see, whoops, that did that on its own. That was weird. Okay. All right. You even see a higher neck during the day than we did before even. It's just very, very conservative. And then in the evening, you see that lower neckline. I remember in Gone with the Wind, that scene with Scarlett O'Hara and her mammy towards the beginning of the movie. And Scarlett is getting dressed for the barbecue during the day, but she wants to wear, a low cut dress. So her mammy says, you can't wear that. You can't show your bosom before 3 o'clock. So it wasn't considered ladylike to have any kind of skin showing like that. So you see the evening wear here with the shoulders showing. And then this, I wanted to just pull this up so you can see it. These sleeves are called pagoda sleeves, this kind of a bell shape. And they would usually have an undersleeve that was made of washable material. Because think of it, these gowns, they're not throwing them into the wash as we do now. They had to be cleaned by their maids or the woman who's wearing it if she didn't have a maid. But they were usually, brushed, spot cleaned. They weren't, of course, washed fully. But what they could wash was their undergarments, And the collar there is one example of that. So that's detachable. The undersleeves were detachable. And whenever their undergarments were, during this period, they had a chemise, which was almost like a long nightgown. Over that would go a corset, and then a corset cover, which looks like a camisole nowadays. And then would go a petticoat over that. So those were all washable. And so even though they did, get dirty, at least the sweat from their bodies that soiled the undergarments, they could take care of that. So just a little bit of information on the undergarments of the period. During the Civil War, when we get into the 1860s, we're going to be looking at war influencing fashion. And one of those influences was General Garibaldi, Giuseppe Garibaldi. His soldiers would wear these red shirts, which you can see there on the right. And they became popular for ladies and children to be worn as blouses. You can see Peterson's magazine was a magazine at the time. This is March 1862, so during the war, and they were called Garibaldi dresses. Another similar example to that was the Zouave jacket. And the Zouave jacket, I'm sorry you can't read that. I should change that font. But it was a regiment in the Civil War who the cadets wore these Algerian soldier jackets, which were called Zouave. And you can see that's on the right. You can see the lady wearing the jacket, but you can also see in that little insert, that's a red Zouave jacket that would be worn sometimes over the Garibaldi blouse. So sometimes they wore the two of them together. And the belt you're seeing is called a Swiss belt, that black belt. Scarlett had in the same scene I was just talking about, had a big green one on, very similar to that. So that Swiss belt was common. Okay, you're going to see changes when we get, I'm just talking about the end of the 50s into the early 60s and the wartime. The changes we'll start to see, we're going to go for a higher waistline again, not so much empire, but higher than we've been seeing. You're also going to see the shoulder line drop. That's a very common thing for the 1860s, is a low armscye or shoulder line. And the flatness, the front of the skirt is going to flatten out, as you can see on the right image. And all of the length is going to be moved towards the back. And that's going to set us up for the bustle period, which we'll talk about in a minute. So more skirt fullness, but moving to the back of the gown and a flatter front. And here's Mary Todd Lincoln. She fits right into this whole time period. Of course, she was the first lady during the entire Civil War. I just saw, I think it was the last one last night on CNN. They had that Divided We Stand about Abraham Lincoln. And they were talking quite extensively about Mary Todd. And she was financially ruined after he died. And they wouldn't even let her in the room when he lay dying from his gunshot wound. And she was very upset. So she didn't get treated that well, but people did not like how she spent money. I guess she loved nice things. And I guess she did spend a lot of the budget money, and people did not, they frowned upon that. So she was disliked for excess spending and extravagance. She was criticized for wearing expensive mourning when her son Willie died. But there was another magazine called Leslie's Magazine, and they praised her and said that they loved her stylish low-cut gowns that displayed the exquisitely molded shoulders and arms of our fair Republican queen. So she was admired in some ways, but for the most part, people disagreed with her spending. And there she is, there's her shoulders showing, and there she is on the right in her day dress. And I'm going to show you a film clip. In this film clip, Sally Field played Mary Todd Lincoln. This came out in 2012, I think it was. Daniel Day-Lewis played Abraham Lincoln. So just check out this clip. It's interesting. And Sally Field is in this too.
I believe you when you insist that amending the Constitution and abolishing slavery will end this war. And since you are sending my son into the war, woe unto you if you fail to pass the amendment. She is such a fascinating, complicated American woman, a historical figure that's very little has been examined, next to never, and so misunderstood always and maligned always. If there had not been a Mary Todd, there would not have been an Abraham Lincoln. Madam President, if you please. Oh, don't convene another subcommittee to investigate me, sir. I'm teasing. Smile, Senator Wade.
I believe I am smiling, Mrs. Lincoln.
Everyone hated her so because she refused to go upstairs and be invisible. She was the first lady. That is where that term came from. It was first directed to her, and it was not done out of affection, put it that way. You have always taken such a lively, even prosecutorial interest in my household account. Or to be a woman of a certain age, which I am, to be gaining that amount of weight was rather horrifying. And every time we do a fitting and we'd measure my waist, we would celebrate when I had put on another 2 inches, which was so antithetical to everything I had ever been through in my life. But the costumes were just absolutely not to be believed. Of course, they weighed 40,000 pounds.
So just a little clip to show you, she was talking about her household accounts and the interest there, because they were complaining of her spending all of this money. And she was trying to justify it later in that same scene. She was saying, well, I was buying, silver and linens because I had to, so she was trying to justify it. But interesting take from Sally Field as well. The next First Lady we are going to look at is the lovely Frances Folsom Cleveland, whose nickname was Frank. People loved her. Her fashion was widely copied. She had an elegance about her that women wanted to emulate. She was one of the youngest First Ladies. And the last part of the term of 1885 to 89, she was there in all of the second term, and she was widely copied for her fashion and style. And you can see she's really looks like she's got very nice taste. Most popular First Lady since Dolly Madison. And men adored her and women emulated her. And the inauguration gown, I'm going to show you on the next page, really kind of exemplifies, who she was and her level of elegance. So we'll look at that, and there it is. I just think it's so beautiful. But even the dress she's wearing on the left, it's so classic. You could wear that today. So I don't know. I just think she was a woman that just many admired for many reasons. And that was during the 1880s. But look what's going on with the back of that dress on the right. Remember I was saying in the 1860s, you started to see a flattening of the front of the dress and the fullness would go to the back. This is setting us up for this bustle period. So we're going to look at that. And there's 3 different types of bustle treatment, if you will. The first part was in the 1870s, and you're looking at more of a drapery effect. Remember, they've got more fabric to work with back there because they lengthen the back of the skirt. So it's almost like when you think about, if you think about your window treatments that you might put up on your windows, they tend to be kind of manipulated and, maybe puffed and gathered here and there. That's what they would do with the backs of the dresses during this period. Doesn't mean they didn't have any structure or a little bit of a bustle under that, but they would also use the fabric as a further way to increase the size of that bustle. almost like a waterfall effect, not rigid, which we'll see later. The middle, which would have been late 1870s into the early 1880s, was a completely different look. All of the decoration moved further down in the skirt. So you can see that in the back of those two skirts. And the front had almost like an apron effect. The tight bodice that looks like a jacket was called a cuirass bodice. And it was very tight, as you can see, covered the hips. Of course, the corset would have had to do a lot of, molding there to make that the hips do that if you weren't naturally built that way. And then the last one in the 1880s, right around 85, 86, you see a different bustle again, much more structured. In fact, it was so flat that it almost looked like you could put a tea tray on it. So that's your later bustle from mid 1800s, mid 1880s. And notice that this train is gone now. You don't see the train on the skirt like we see in the first image. Notice the kind of a longer train. We don't see that as much in the 1885, 86 versions of that bustle. So a little bit different. And then when we move to the 1890s, now we're talking some serious sleeves. Remember the 1830s? Well, those sleeves are a different shape altogether. These are high, big puffy sleeves, sometimes going up as high as the neckline of the dress, the high neck. And that's a really good illustration or example of that on the left. So we're looking at very big sleeves, very stiff, and another way to show status and wealth, because who's going to want to scrub floors in that thing? It's just too unwieldy. So let me toggle this so that you can see. Look at the side of it, how big that is. And there it is from the back. Look at that. So it was all about how big can we make these sleeves. And then the ladies on the right are in day dresses, very tight waist, kind of like a little bit of a bell-shaped skirt, but nothing big like it was earlier in the century. And you also don't have any bustle left. The only thing that is left at all is look at the left, the dress on the left. You can see some gathering in the back of the dress. That's the only thing that was left of the bustle, was just a little bit extra fabric. So it was all about the sleeves. Even sportier clothing or more casual clothing would still have those sleeves. Everything followed fashion, no matter whether it was sports or whatever women were wearing, would still be following a certain silhouette. Women were getting more into sports. In fact, the 1890s, bicycling was a very big thing. So bicycling would be, they would have certain clothing to wear for that, most times skirts, but they did have something sort of like the not Turkish trousers, but oh boy, I can tell when it's later in the day, I just lose my mind. It'll come to me. But more like pantaloons for ladies to wear for more sporting events. But that wasn't the norm. That wasn't the norm at this time. Usually it would be skirts. And notice this is called a tailor-made. What was going on there is women really admired the tailored clothing that the men wore, and they wanted something that well made themselves along the same lines. So they would ask for things to be made the way tailors made men's clothing. And that's what this particular promenade or traveling costume is. In addition to that, blouses, which were called shirtwaists at the time, became popular. And like a man's shirt, again, they were looking for something like that. More women were starting to work outside the home and become a little bit more active in general. And this blouse made more sense than the traditional bodices we'd been seeing before this. And you notice kind of a high neck on that. They had entire factories that made these shirtwaists. In fact, in 1911, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, I think it was either New York or New Jersey, these poor women were locked inside, and they had this giant fire, and the women all perished because they couldn't get out. They couldn't get out the doors. So a very sad story. But so whole factories would be making these various shirtwaists for ladies. And then check this out. This was right around the turn of the century. So we had the sleeves in the 90s. Now we're going into the Edwardian period, which is technically 1901 to 1910 when King Edward died. But 1908 is when you start to see this silhouette morph into something else. But this is called the pigeon front or S-curve silhouette. So what it does is the corset forces the body into this sort of S shape so that the breasts were pushed forward and the rear end is pushed back. It's called a pigeon front, and it's also called a monobosom because it looks like one big boob, one big breast. But notice that incredible shape. So the waist is still important. You can see it's very cinched, but you have all of this kind of puffing out in front on the shirt waist. And that's why it was called a pigeon front. So if you look at a shirt waist from the period, you can see that the back is a lot shorter than the front. You've got all this extra fabric in the front so that it'll form that sort of pouch look that you see on the lady there. And the skirt switched its emphasis as well. You can see it hugs the hips more than it did in the last decade, and it looks more like a trumpet shape at the bottom. So all these little differences started to occur in each decade. And here's another example on the right of a shirtwaist with the skirt of this new period. You can see she's got that pigeon front. She still has a little bit of a big sleeve, but it's more about being a bishop sleeve than it is about being a very big leg of mutton sleeve, which they called the 1890s sleeves. And look at the young ladies on the left. That's a more kind of practical look. Whenever you see a fashion plate or an illustration, it's always going to be the extreme example of the style. But real women, would wear forms of that, but it looks a little more comfortable the way they're standing. So who fits into this period? Alice Roosevelt Longworth, who was the daughter of Teddy Roosevelt. And she was very rebellious, and you can see it on her face. You really can. So she was his daughter. And of course, he was there 1901 to 1909. And she shocked society. And later in life, when the media was still criticizing her, she quoted, "The trouble with reporters is that they expect me to wear a halo and I only wear a hat." So I can just picture her saying that, looking at her face. It's great. She often filled in because she was Teddy's daughter. She often filled in at the White House and helped out. She lived till 96 years old. So it must be something about being outspoken that helps. So that's a good thing. Her fame continued long after her dad's office ended in 1908, and she loved the latest European fashions. So I told you that the silhouette would change around 1908, and there was a designer from Paris named Paul Poiret. And he was very involved with the Ballet Russe, the Russian ballet, and they debuted in 1909. And they had colorful costumes with a real Oriental flair. And he designed his garments for women, following along those lines. And there was a certain silhouette called Turkish trousers. That's what they look like. So they're big sort of balloon-like pants, and she wore them. And she even wore the hobble skirt, and people did not like that. Poiret had a very narrow skirt at the bottom, and they called it a hobble skirt because women had trouble walking. They couldn't walk very fast in it. She even wore Oriental style pajamas in public once. So she was feisty, and I love that about her. You can see she's got the Edwardian Gibson girl hairdo. And there she is in beautiful portrait on the left, and then in her later years, still looking feisty and still looking quite alive. So God bless her. This is the new line I mentioned. In 1908, you started to see a shift away from that S-curve, and you're starting to see a little bit more of an empire waist coming back. If you saw the movie Titanic that came out in the 90s with Kate Winslet, these are the styles that they showcased in that particular film because, of course, the Titanic sank in 1912. Also, if you're a Downton Abbey fan, you'll see some of these styles in that series too. And that brings us to the 20s, and we're moving along in the 20th century. And of course, the 20s was all about women had earned the right to vote. They weren't given the right, they earned it. They really fought hard for it. And that gave them this sort of liberation and freedom. And, that reflected, it was reflected in fashion. And you're seeing the low waist, but kind of boxy, almost boyish silhouette with a shorter hem. Some women cut their hair into this bob style, more like, garçon kind of style. And that was very daring at the time. And then in the evening, of course, you can see on the right, they would show a little more skin. And this was the age of Prohibition. So we're looking at, speakeasies and great jazz music and dancing. And so the young people had a good time with that. And the 20s was all about gaiety and color and fun. And that would change in the next decade, unfortunately. So in this period, we have Grace Coolidge, and she was there. She was 23 to 29, First Lady then, Calvin Coolidge, of course. She wore glamorous evening gowns and she would not do interviews, but she was very outgoing when visitors came to the White House. She just didn't like to do interviews for some reason. She endeared herself to American people by her untiring courtesy, modesty, an example of the best admired qualities of American womanhood. So people did like her, and you can just tell by the images here, very elegant way about her. And again, she loved beautiful evening gowns. But that brings us to the 30s. And as I mentioned, now we're talking about the Great Depression. So as we saw in the 1840s, in the 1930s, remember I told you in the 40s that it became more somber. Same thing happened here. You started to see the hemlines go back down, and the colors became a little deeper and less frivolous, fewer bright colors, a little bit more serious looking. And it was this economic situation for the most part that caused that. But there was a change from the beginning of the decade to the end. So you're looking at, this is typical 1930s, early on. And you can see these dresses are very typical, kind of puffy sleeves, sometimes more like a butterfly sleeve, and small prints a lot of times, and very, slim fit, natural waistline. But by the end of the decade, when we're looking at the beginning of World War II, this was the style change. So the war came, there were restrictions in fabric, and you see this complete change yet again. Hemline went back up to right below the knee, and you started to see more structure in the shoulders as well. That's going to stay that way for most of the war too. So Eleanor Roosevelt fits right in here. And I told you I would talk about some first ladies who weren't all about fashion. They were about other things. And she did a lot in the White House, 33 to 45. He was elected to a fourth term, but he did not survive it. And Eleanor was, again, even though she was a human rights activist, very trusted advisor to FDR. And so, she spoke her mind and helped him in his presidency as well. She was the first lady to do radio broadcasts. I thought that was so interesting about her. And it's just kind of fun to read about her and see documentaries about her, because she faced a lot of adversity, and she knew he was having affairs, and she just kept doing what she did best. And again, human rights activist, and helped a lot of women. And then, of course, during the war, I talked about fabric restrictions, and this is a good example of that. So after 39 and into, the early part of the war, they started to use many materials for the war effort. So things like wool, things like, nylon, which was a new fabric at the time. And they were using these things for the war, leather. So people had to get very creative with their styling and their wardrobes. Designers or dressmakers had to use as little fabric as possible. The skirts, that's why they shortened. You couldn't have what was called a big sweep, which was just a big wide skirt, because it was too much fabric. The other thing is they got very creative with the design of the suit so that they weren't using a lot of extra fabric. So look at this image right here on the right. This is a really cool suit, very typical of the 40s. And you see these little, almost like a half belt. And then these pieces here almost look like they're cut out. That is to give a little bit of interest without using extra fabric. And then look at the back of it. I'm going to change it to you so you can see the back. Look at that. So very clever use of design and very little extra fabric. So they did have those restrictions. Many women too remade not only their own clothing, to be more in tune with what was going on during the war. But they would, the men were at the war, they were fighting. So they would take the men's suits and make clothing for themselves and for their children. The men weren't using them. So that's another big thing that they were doing. They were really encouraged to make do and mend, you know, not to spend money on things that they didn't really need. After the war, though, I think I talked about this if you were at the cocktail culture event that we did, and the Mad Men era, and you'll know about him. This is Christian Dior, and he did this spring collection in 47, and he completely changed the fashion back to the wide, long, full skirts, and nipped in waist again, and soft shoulder, no more big shoulder pads. So that, as you know a lot about that period if you saw that event. And two different examples, especially as we get into the early 50s, you start to see other choices, such as a very narrow skirt that you see on the left, almost like a hobble skirt earlier, it's very, very tight. And in fact, they call them wiggle dresses now because they're so tight, kind of forced to wiggle when you wear them. But then you also had the wide skirts that you see on the right. I think this is a beautiful era for fashion. It's just one of my favorites. The undergarments would support, I might have shown this slide before. This is how to support the silhouette you just saw on the previous slides. So very pointy bras and very tight girdles that went right over the hips and even over the thighs a little bit. So that if you did wear one of those really svelte skirts, you wouldn't see any lumps or bumps. And there they are. Mamie Eisenhower was First Lady during this period, so 53 to 61. We're looking at her different choices. She loved pink, probably no surprise when you look at these pictures. She loved pink so much. Not only did she wear a lot of pink dresses and suits, but she wore the accessories as well, gloves, shoes, hats, and bags, pink. Even lipstick cases were pink. So she really loved the color. And then, of course, the famous Mamie bangs of the 50s, you can see right here in all three of these images. She rejected old lady clothes, as she called them, and the behavior of older women. She wore strapless evening dresses with full skirts like those favored by high school seniors for the prom. So anyway, I don't think she looks inappropriate, but she didn't want to look fuddy-duddy, kind of, is what she said. So here are her two dresses, 53 and 57, for the inaugural balls. Notice they're both a light pink, and their accessories are also light pink. So she stuck, you know, she stayed true to herself and stuck to her favorite color. 60s, we're almost there. You're seeing of course, the new look on the left, and then we had the British invasion and the London look. And that's another whole, I do one called the Swingin' 60s, which is all about this change and how it affected fashion so much. So you see the lady on the girl on the right, she's in more of the mod look. Think about Twiggy as a model at the time. But this is also when we're going to see Jackie Kennedy, but she's early 60s. So it's still a little conservative over here. You're seeing more of this in London, but by the middle of the decade here in America, that look on the right is going to be very popular. So here's Jackie. And of course, unfortunately, a very short term as a First Lady. But she, people really admired her for her fashion. And, you know, she had the bracelet sleeves on. You can see it on her inaugural day suit on the right. And there's her inaugural gown. I believe she had something to do with making that, designing it, not making it, but designing it. And I'm wearing a typical period, early 60s suit jacket, which has the bracelet, call them bracelet sleeves too. Got something under it because it's freezing down here where I'm doing this, but this is the 3/4 length, which was a typical jacket for this period. The hat is also 50s or early 60s that matches the suit. So everything matched, you know, again, shoes, bag, gloves, hats. And she was really good about doing that. Very, very much admired. Unfortunately, when her husband was assassinated, she had this beautiful pink suit on. You can see the bracelet sleeves there again, but she did not take it off. She did not want to remove it, even though it was bloodstained, because she wanted the American people to see what they'd done to her husband. and it's now in the National Archives. She sent the whole suit and the matching hat, shoes, and bag to the National Archives, where they still are today. Pillbox hats were big for her. Sort of sat on that bouffant hairdo. And Halston, before he got into women's wear, think about the disco era with Halston dresses, but before that, he was making hats. And he made her hats. And Oleg Cassini was one of her designers. You're going to see a film clip on that in a second. And here it is. And this is more of an advertisement for Oleg Cassini's book, but it's a fabulous video of the fashions that she was wearing. So here we go.
1,000 Days of Magic, Dressing Jacqueline Kennedy for the White House, is a personal memoir by Oleg Cassini. There are moments in history where events converge to create something rare and special. First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy's selection of Oleg Cassini as her personal couturier to design her official wardrobe was one of those moments. Not only in fashion history, but in political history as well. Oleg Cassini created a look for Jacqueline Kennedy, which became known as the Jackie look. As First Lady, Jackie became one of the best-dressed women in the world and a memorable and glamorous icon of the Kennedy era. Together, they created magic. During the 1,000 days of the Kennedy administration, Oleg Cassini designed over 300 outfits for Jackie. Coats, dresses, evening gowns, suits, and daywear. As the First Lady's Secretary of Style, Oleg coordinated every aspect of her wardrobe, from shoes and hats to gloves and handbags. As Oleg said, I dressed her as a star in a major film, which she was, the most influential and fashionable First Lady of all time. And as Jackie graciously stated, Oleg dressed me for the part. Oleg Cassini offers a fascinating, insightful, and comprehensive view of his role as Jackie's personal couturier. His international background allowed him to fit comfortably into the Kennedy political dynasty and offered him unprecedented access to both Jackie and Jack Kennedy as a designer and as a trusted friend. From the details of his long-standing friendship with the Kennedy family to his meeting with the new First Lady-elect in her hospital room just after the birth of her son, John F. Kennedy Jr., to his thoughts on Jackie's fashion imprint and her legacy. Cassini's personal and visual recollections and details are far-ranging and informative. Within the pages of 1,000 Days of Magic are Cassini's original sketches, notes, fabric swatches, and more than 250 photographs of the First Lady as she tours India, Pakistan, France, England, and Italy, shows off the White House, and hosts state dinners and family gatherings. Both public and private moments are visually illustrated within the pages of the book, capturing the aura and majesty of the 1,000 days of the Kennedy White House, celebrating the elegance and charm of the First Lady, who became one of the most admired and emulated women in the world. This beautiful pictorial history book is essential for anyone interested in an intimate view of one of history's most iconic moments. Oleg Cassini is known as an icon of style, and he personifies the American dream in all its hope and glory.
So you can see it's more of an ad to him, but I gotta tell you, the book, I really wanted it, but I looked for it on Amazon. It was a little pricey for me at the time. So, but I think it's still available. So it looks, what I like is that the sketches and notes are there too. So you're seeing this whole story unfold in the designer's life with her. Okay, finishing up with the last few decades, we're looking at 60s still, but as I said, after Jackie's stint as First Lady, we're going to see a different style coming again out of London mostly, and also some art movements are going to be influential. I remember this very well, the art, pop art and op art, optical illusion, which you see here, which is black and white, and it's almost dizzying to look at. So there's the op art. And the pop art, I think Andy Warhol with all of his soup cans. They even had paper dresses, not just Campbell's. A lot of companies had them, and you could buy these paper dresses. If you ordered, you had to go through the mail, and you'd send, like, I think it was 3 soup labels from the cans plus $1, and you got one of these dresses. If you find these online, they are worth a lot of money. I watched an auction on eBay once, and it went into the hundreds and hundreds of thousands because it was still in the package. And that is very collectible. I do have a dress. I didn't pull it out for this one, but I do have a paper dress. It's not a Campbell's soup, but it's still in pretty good shape considering. Bringing us into the 70s is we're going to be looking at getting away from that short skirt, mini skirt that we saw in the 60s and into the maxi skirt of the early 70s, but also the skirt's going to continue to be short. They're not going to get rid of the mini skirt right away, but you're going to see more lengths as variations of that. And here you start to see the long gown becoming fashionable again for more formal events. And Nancy Reagan, we get into the 80s. Now we're looking at the age of conspicuous consumption, the decade of conspicuous consumption. People had more money, the economy was good, and used to have bumper stickers that said, you know, those with the most toys, those who die with the most toys wins, or something crazy like that. So during the 80s, just there was a lot going on with fashion and a lot of opulent fabrics and bright colors. And Nancy liked this. As you can see, she wore red quite often. She looked great in it. And she liked gowns. She loved her pricey evening gowns. There's her inauguration in the middle. And then this is the other one, the first one, second one. Very conservative, you know, elegant, but conservative. Hillary Clinton, not really known for high fashion. I remember early on when she was first lady, how the pantsuit thing with the headband and all that, they were making fun of that. I love this Christmas sweater that she's got on in the middle, but the gown on the right, the inauguration, goes gorgeous. And you're going to see a clip of this in a minute, but I just think the color and it just looked beautiful on her. So she did have some good taste in fashion as well. I just don't think she was she wasn't a fashion icon. And there's the dress again. And there is the second one on the right. Michelle Obama, criticized for showing her arms. How do you like that? She has great arms. Why wouldn't she show them off? But yes, she was. Of course, people are going to criticize first ladies for whatever they can find. But just, I didn't like the first inauguration dress, that white one. For some reason, I just didn't. But I loved the red one that you'll see in a second. I like the second one better. She did have a young designer for both of those dresses. His name is Jason Wu, and she pretty much put him on the map when he designed her inaugural gowns. I love the red one, and I love her inauguration day coat. Melania, who, of course, is no longer in the White House, but, you know, I don't know how I felt about her. I didn't see a lot of her or see a lot of her fashion. I do love the suit on the right for inauguration day because it reminds me of Jackie's. And I don't know if that was done on purpose or not, but except for the pillbox hat, look at the color and look at the bracelet length sleeve she's wearing and the long gloves and just that beautiful blue. So I just thought that was kind of an elegant thing to do. I love that outfit on her. And now we have Jill, and it's yet to be seen, what her fashion will be like overall. It looks like she likes florals because I saw a lot of pictures of her in florals. And she likes some bright colors too. So we'll see what happens with her. So she's there now. And the last film clip I'm going to show you is right before she became First Lady, because they talk about Melania waiting to see her dress go to the Smithsonian. So you'll see that clip coming up. And here's her inauguration. I love that blue. Again, that's popular for inauguration day, as you can see. And then they didn't have, of course, they didn't have the ball, but they had the inaugural concert. And that coat that you see, there's her dress, of course, on the left, but the coat, there's an embroidered flower representing every state. And I thought that was very cool and very elegant and beautiful. So this last video is going to take us through some inauguration gowns through the years. And then I'm going to open it up for questions and show you my garments and accessories. So here goes.
It may seem like frivolous fun, but the First Lady's inaugural gown is no mere party dress.
In this tradition of the inaugural ball.
The moment it's revealed, every detail is dissected. The cut, the color, the cost, held up to critique.
There is a message behind that fashion. You know, it is a dress, but it also says a lot about who they are, what the personality is. And I think in that one moment, it sort of summarizes what that entire person is about.
If that's not enough pressure, there's more.
I like all of my wife's dresses, but particularly this one tonight. When she finishes with it, you get it at the Smithsonian.
It is a dress that will stand in the National Museum of American History forever. So you want to have something that will represent you for the rest of time for all of the world to see.
Lisa Kathleen Grady is the curator of the Smithsonian's First Ladies exhibit, where the gowns are like time capsules.
You go everywhere from the very 80s shoulders of Barbara Bush's gown to Mamie Eisenhower's traditional ball gown with a sleeveless cut.
Rosalind Carter famously and frugally re-wore an off-the-rack gown.
How many of you like my wife's old dress?
4 years later,
President of the United States and Mrs. Reagan.
Nancy Reagan ushered in a more formal White House with her white one-sleeved James Galanos gown. Estimated worth $10,000.
Nancy Reagan was a Hollywood actress. You know, she knew how to make an entrance. She knew about red carpets.
Fashion icon Jacqueline Kennedy helped design her own white sleeveless chiffon.
President Kennedy and the First Lady venture from the White House to attend a round of no less than 5 gala inaugural balls.
First ladies traditionally choose American designers. Hillary Clinton discovered her designer at an Arkansas boutique. Laura Bush selected a fellow Texan.
First of all, how good looking is my wife?
In 2009, Michelle Obama thrilled the fashion world by her choice of a rising talent.
By choosing a 26-year-old designer named Jason Wu that no one had heard of, that was huge. I mean, that literally put his name on the map overnight.
It's now Melania Trump's moment in history, and her gown's place behind the glass awaits.
It's always an exciting moment for us when we see the new gown. It's like a teaser of an administration to come.
So as you can see, that's the last one because, you know, it's the latest one I could get. And Jill, they'll be waiting for Jill's next. Okay, I'm going to stop the screen share. And let's get to the show and tell. Let's see. Stop share. There we are. Okay. If everybody can see all right, I'm going to go ahead and go through these dresses. I don't have any First Lady dresses, of course, but I do have examples of what I think a First Lady might have worn in a few of the periods we talked about. So this one is 20s. This is a beautiful brown velvet, silk velvet. This is why I wish we were in person. I mean, I'm happy to do it this way because it's all we have right now, but I'd love you to be able to feel this fabric because it is unbelievable. So beautiful silk satin, brown velvet. This was a wedding dress and it has the insert of this beautiful cream colored, almost tea stained look in front and back and on the sleeves as well. And it is that low waist and shorter skirt. And this is from the 30s. It had some damage, unfortunately. I wanted to have it dry cleaned. It had so much staining and it ended up, the beading started to come loose, but I still hold on to it and try to keep it as it is and not make it any worse. But this is a late 30s dress and beautiful coral color. And I could see a First Lady maybe wearing this. And look at the back, all the buttons that go down. Gorgeous dress. This is late 30s, actually early 40s. It does have shoulder pads and it's got like this blue sun effect here. And it's just a plain black, but very elegant dress, long sleeve, but look at the collar, look at the beads, both seed beads and these, oh, I can't think of the name of them, but they're just all silver beaded all throughout. The whole collar is encrusted with these beads and just absolutely elegant and gorgeous and in great condition. This dress reminded me of Mamie Eisenhower because it's pink. So I had to show you this. This is just, it's got beads all throughout the top. And then it's got some embroidery on the bottom, on the skirt as well. These little round beaded pieces on the skirt. And then the back also has the beads throughout, and that very low 50s back that I probably talked about during cocktail culture. Very common. This one, I don't know if I showed you, but I'm going to show you again anyway, even if I did. I could just see Jackie Kennedy wearing this for some reason. This is a very unusual 50s dress. It's green wool on the top. And then the bottom is chiffon, but it has the built-in petticoat. And it's got all of this embroidery, a little bit of almost like a button effect and little sequins or little beads throughout. And then the belt is wool, like the bodice is. And it's just very, very simple, but a different color, you know, and in great condition. This one you've probably seen, but I love this. And again, made me think of Mamie Eisenhower with this beautiful, almost cummerbund effect. And this lovely print of flowers, pink, again, built-in petticoat, and an almost bustle effect in the back. It doesn't have any structure under it, but it's just this beautiful satin, almost bow-like structure that could have been made into a bustle. Another one I usually show during cocktail culture, but I had to because it just looks like a First Lady's dress. And it's this beautiful brocade blue and green dress. I've worn this before to at least one wedding, and it's just beautifully made. And on the bottom, it has these panels inside. You open it up and it's this iridescent bluish green color on the inside. And I have a vintage blue and green stone bracelet from the 50s or early 60s. Perfect match to this. So when I wear this dress, I wear that blue and green vintage bracelet as well. Another First Lady, now I don't know if they would have, I don't know if Mamie would have worn something that gets this bright at the bottom. I don't know. She might have, but this is a really nice 50s beaded throughout cardigan, which was a very common style at the time, but it's sequins, the whole thing. And it's this ombre effect. So it's going from this light pink to this very deep, almost hot pink. And then finally, this dress, again, another cocktail culture favorite, is this ikat floral. And in the back, it has the same floral, but in chiffon, and it attaches at the bottom. And there's a little bow in the front at the very bottom on the hem. Hope you can see that okay. Stunning dress. No longer fits me, unfortunately. I've worn it, can't fit into it anymore. And, you know, if you've ever tried a dress with a side zipper and it's not supposed to fit, don't even go there because you can't get out of it. You're trapped like a rat in the dress. It's happened to me before. I had to get helped out of this thing. I'm lucky I didn't rip it. But anyway, that is a beautiful example of a 50s, early 60s dress. And just a few accessories. This bag, it made me think of Jackie Kennedy for a day bag, but it's a black patent leather, very structured, which was typical for 60s. But what I love is when you open it up, it's got this striped fabric and a little matching change purse, which I always have trouble with this because it's attached. And it's the same stripe, same fabric. I just think that's so cute. And as I'm sure I've mentioned before, when you get a vintage bag, you never know what might be inside it. So that's always exciting for me. Because at the time, they would sell bags with combs, mirrors, even compacts sometimes. Look at this beautiful beaded bag. I could see a First Lady wearing this to the ball bringing this with her. It's heavy, heavy, heavy. It's all beads and front and back, gorgeous design, floral. And then you open it up and inside it came with a hanky. Came with a hanky. I didn't even do anything with it. I just kept it. This beautiful floral and leaf hanky. Oh, I'm sorry. More than one. Hello. Here's another hanky that came in when I bought the bag, and probably was a mirror of, in there. It's not there anymore, but lovely silk satin interior in great condition. And last but not least, I have 3 hats. I've got the one on and then 3 more. This is a green felt. I love this hat. But check this out. Look at this fuchsia colored hat with the feathers. And it's just, it doesn't have any label inside, but it's just so cute. And it's this beautiful silk velvet. It's just beautiful. I could see this being worn with the brown dress. I could even see that as a gorgeous combination for a lady. This one I love this style, the 50s style of all you have to do is just put it right on your head and it sits kind of snug like a headband. But look at the flowers. And then even the inside is lace. They didn't leave details, they didn't leave anything to chance. They always made sure the details were there as well. And the last hat, look at this one. All I could think of is Jackie, because this doesn't fit right over your head. It fits on top of the hair, sort of like what Jackie would have worn, but it's a fake fur and it has a beautiful velvet band with these beads and rhinestones, iridescent rhinestones. And then look at this, it's got a brooch that's attached to it and this beautiful velvet ribbon. So this is an incredible hat. On the inside, it says Grand Prix Chapeau, Paris and New York. So you know it's going to be well made, and it really is. So that's all I have to show you today. So let's open it up and see if anybody has any questions or comments. And again, I thank you all for being here so much. I love having you all. So anybody have anything they'd like to ask me or any comments?
If you have a question, don't forget to unmute yourself.
I have a question. I'm
Yeah.
wondering what you have behind you on the mannequin. In the
Oh.
dress.
Okay, I'm glad you said that. I'll bring it forward for you.
In case anyone didn't hear that, she asked what dress was on the mannequin behind her.
I've worn this, I can still fit in this, I think. I wore this to one of my stepson's weddings. This is 1940s. And I love this dress. I don't know, this is a very common, remember I told you that they had to be very careful with how much fabric and how much embellishment they added. So they just put a little bit at the neck, a little bit of sequins, and then right at the hip. These are fake pockets. There's just it is a pocket, but very, very not deep at all. So because they couldn't use much fabric. So, but this is just a simple, beautiful black dress that's so classic. You really could still wear it, and I did. I wore it to the. I wish I had a picture of myself in it so you could see what it looks like, but it's it was comfortable too, and it's just like a crepe, like a black crepe, very, very classic, which I love. So thanks for asking about that.
Sure. Was that pocket for maybe a lipstick?
I don't think that was really meant to hold, because the lady would have had her bag with her, but I just think they wanted to add some embellishment without having deep pockets.
Thank you.
Or who knows? Maybe they did tuck a little lipstick in there. Why not? Anybody else?
I just wanted to tell Karen how much I enjoyed the whole presentation. It was wonderful.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. It means a lot to me. Thank you. I have a good time. I had fun. Thank you.
I can't wait to have you here in the
me
senior
too.
center so you can bring all of
Yes.
your goods so we can go through them.
Absolutely. And you have to, if you go to a collection, like when I was at URI in grad school, you couldn't touch anything without white gloves because of the oils on your hands. But that's not what this is about. This is about enjoying fashions of the past, and you can touch them. So I'll let you don't have to wear white gloves. You can actually feel them, and they're still doing just fine. So we're not going to worry about that. So yeah, I can't wait to come and see and meet you all in person. That'll be great. That'll be great. Yeah.
Thank you
Thank
so,
you,
so
Liz, and
much.
everyone else who
Everyone-
came, and look forward to the next time.
Yeah, if you're watching right now, tell me what era you'd like to see next, and we'll have Ren back again with us.
Very
Thank you so
enjoyable.
much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Thank
Stay-
you.
Stay
Bye-bye.
well. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.